Okay, let's investigate and talk about what the First Amendment says and some of the controversy and issues with the First Amendment. Again, when we talk about amendments and we talk about the document of the Constitution from 1791 is when the Bill of Rights is going to come out. We have to put things in perspective. We have to see the whole picture. So the question is the First Amendment relevant today? Which means, can you still use it today? Could the Founding Fathers seen some of the issues that we have with the First Amendment today? And then what is actually covered? Because this is a huge debate. The First Amendment is one of the most debated amendments in the Constitution, in addition to the Second Amendment. And there's a lot of controversy, which are discussions and arguments about what it really means. But we're going to break it down into 4 parts, and we're going to look at the key terms in the First Amendment. So the first part of the First Amendment, which tells you the Founding Fathers probably held this very, very, very highly above all, is separation of church and state. And I'm going to say the separation of church and state is the government cannot establish a religion or support one religion over another. Okay, well, let's look at that. Have we done that? Have we honored this idea? Well, do we have an official religion in America? What's the official religion of America? Well, the answer is no, we do not. While the majority of Americans, around 70% of Americans, are Christian, still, under this, the first part of the First Amendment, separation of church and state, we do not disrespect or supposed to persecute the minority, the other 30%, which may be Muslim, Buddhist, Jewish, also atheists, non-religious at all, are deists, people that believe in God but do not believe in religion. They cannot be persecuted under the First Amendment. So the key terms are separation of church, so church is representing religion, and state. And state is a sovereign or an area that rules itself independently. So when they say state, they're talking about the government, that the country and the government. So we have to keep the government separate from people's religion. Now, I used the picture on the left. These women are wearing headscarves, which is a part of a Muslim religion. There are some Muslim sects. Sects are parts of Islam, or pieces of the Muslim religion, that believe that they have to wear a headscarf in public. Women have to wear specifically what's called a hijab. And some hijads actually cover, depending how strict or orthodox, which means how really, really conservative or traditional the Muslim religion is, that part of the religion is, some hijabs cover your face completely. These women are just wearing headscarves. Now, I got to tell you from experience, I've had students over the years that were of Muslim religion, and they would wear their headscarves to class, and other students had made comments because we had a clear policy. You could not wear hats or headgear in the building. And they'd be like, well, how come they get to wear a hijab or a headscarf? And the answer was, it's a part of their religion. And we had an open discussion once, and one of the students said, they asked us, why can't you take off your hijab? Why can't you take off that headscarf? What would happen? And the girl said, well, I would go to hell. She believed that from her perspective, she had learned that she would go to hell. So this is definitely a separation of church and state issue. So I'm a public school teacher in a public school. Can I tell a student to take off religious gear or religious items? And the answer is no, because I would be persecuting them, and I would be not, as a working for the government and the state, I cannot infringe on their religion, especially, and that's a really good example of when I cannot infringe. However, if somebody is wearing a Chicago Bulls hat, which I'm not a Bulls fan at all, or even a Knicks hat, and I love the Knicks, I can't tell them to take that off, and they have to take it off. It's a part of our policy. And no, as much as I like the Knicks, watching the New York Knicks basketball team is not a religion. Therefore, I can tell them to take off the hat. So if they have a legitimate claim that it's a part of their religion to wear a certain clothing item, then I cannot stop them, because that's separation of church and state. So this protects the minority, the people that have religious reasons that they'll wear certain clothes or they do certain things. But we have to ask a lot of questions about how far does this go. So, for example, in the Southwest of the United States, There's indigenous American tribes still today that have what are called shaman religious leaders. And it's common, especially in Latin America, to go with the shaman, and this is part of their spiritual religion, to go with the shaman out in the woods and take a drug which is called peyote, which comes from cactus, and it makes them hallucinate, makes them very sick, it makes you vomit and hallucinate. However, they do it not to get away from reality or to escape something like using drugs. They do it with the shaman for religious reasons, and they believe that this is a spiritual enlightenment. So they're becoming more connected with the spirits of the earth. So the question is that covered under separation of church and state? Can the government arrest you if for religious reasons you're using certain drugs? But then there's other issues too, where there's been religions where they use physical harm towards people, and they hurt females, and they make them hurt themselves. But it's a part of their religion or culture. Is that covered under the First Amendment, church and state? On the other hand, too, if the majority of Americans are Christian, for example, can they put the Ten Commandments on a school? Well, a school is a state government building. Can they put a cross in a school? Can they make students pray? And these are all highly debated issues that I want you to think about. Now, the second part of the First Amendment is freedom of speech and press. And this is probably the most debated part of the First Amendment, because there's so many things that people consider that are under this part of the First Amendment. So I want you to put freedom of speech and press on the left side of the paper, and that's your main idea or term. And the definition is, we are allowed to criticize the government and each other. Does this allow all forms of art and press, or to not be regulated by the government? And that's a good question. So freedom of speech literally means you can say what you want. And press is the media, so the news. So CNN, Fox News, Channel 5 News, the Post-Dispatch, New York Times newspapers, Chicago Tribune, the BBC News, can they say whatever they want in the United States? There's the questions. Do we have restrictions on this? And the answer is we do. In fact, some people believe that you could just curse in public, and that's actually not necessarily true. Depending on the city ordinance you live in, like, it could be against the law to curse in public, and you could get a ticket. You're probably not going to go to jail, but you get fined, like a speeding ticket, and you'd have to pay money. So you have to ask the question, whose rights are above all? Is it the person who wants to use freedom of speech? Are their rights more important under this, or everybody else's rights? So a lot of issues get very contentious. So they get really, really heated and debated. So people have said under freedom of speech and press, your expression is covered. So your expression of your body. So you can wear whatever you want. Some people have said you don't have to wear anything at all. There's a man in Berkeley, California, who refuses to put clothes on. He is a nudist. He takes a towel with him, puts the towel down on the chair, and sits on the towel so he doesn't get anything dirty, but he refuses to put clothes on. Well, is nudity covered under the First Amendment? Most people don't think so. But in a private area, they don't care. I've been to Europe, and they had beaches where you could pretty much not wear anything, and it was not against the law. So is that covered under the First Amendment? Artwork. Well, if we look at some artworks that are very offensive to groups, a famous artwork is called Piss Christ, and this is a true famous piece of art where an artist took a clear bucket, and he urinated in it, and he put a crucifix in it. And he took a picture of it, and he did some stuff with lighting, and it does look pretty, I gotta admit. However, what group would that be really offensive to? And the answer is Christians. Christians have been very offended by this. Should that be allowed in a public museum? Is it freedom of speech? It's just art? He said he wasn't doing it to offend anyone. I've seen some other artwork where a man made a swastika that represents Nazis into a bookshelf. It's pretty offensive. Most people agree that Nazis are bad guys, and they don't want their symbols out in public. What do you do with those guys? What do you do with the new Nazis, the neo-Nazis? Do you let them go in a park and speak their mind? And these are all good questions to ask, and we're going to debate in class. But think about it. But on the other hand, if you stop one group from saying things, Why would the government stop groups that are saying things about the government? So it's very dangerous. It becomes very dangerous really quickly. So where does the regulations or restrictions come in where the government actually says, no, you can't do this, and makes laws? And when do they end? Where, no, you're free to do all this. Because it says freedom of speech and press. So let's think about that. Now we're going to move on to the third part. And we're going to watch the videos in class and the examples. And we're going to hear different perspectives from the neo-Nazis to Barack Obama. And actually, I want to show you one thing. This idea of freedom of speech and press really comes from the Enlightenment movement in the 1700s. Most of it was in France. And you could really trace it back to Voltaire. Now, Voltaire is considered by many as one of the most famous philosophers of all times. And he is quoted, we think he said this, "I do not agree with what you have to say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." That's a very strong statement. And if you think about what that means, is, wow, this guy thinks that people should be able to disagree, like completely disagree with someone. Like, they don't believe in anything I say, but he'll turn around and he'll fight to make sure you have the freedom to say things like that. He thinks freedom of speech is that important. Would you be willing to die so that people could say what they want in America? I want you to think about that. We do have people that are willing to die for these ideas. For example, the government and the military pled allegiance to the Constitution and the government. So they're protecting our Constitution, our government, and the idea of freedom of speech from other countries where they don't have freedom of speech. In Saudi Arabia, women can't even drive a car, more or less, go outside and talk bad about the government. In dictatorships where there's one ruler and what are called unlimited power governments, unlimited governments, holy shnikes. If the kid's talking bad about the government in school, they'll just grab you, rip you out of class, and if you're lucky, you might get beaten or hurt. If you're not lucky, you might end up in jail. So now we're going to look at the third part of the First Amendment, and that's peaceably assemble. And that does sound weird. Peaceably assemble. And it is a word, and it's correct grammar, and that's how they spoke at the time. We do not say peaceably, we say peacefully today. But it actually says peaceably. And so what we think that means is we are free to meet and protest and to criticize the government, companies, or people on public property. Peacefully. Okay, so that's the key. Well, then that asks the question of, well, what if you had the neo-Nazis, which is a hate group, and they hate Jewish people and minorities, and they want to go to the park, and they want to preach hatred? Is that covered under assembling peacefully if they get 40 people to show up? Or is it not? Could they cause a riot? Because if they show up and other groups know about it, then maybe another group, like the Black Panthers, which is a Black Pride group, might show up to protest them, and it could turn into a fight, and it has turned into fights. So is this covered under the First Amendment? And that's a big debate. The neo-Nazis in Skokie, Illinois, the story goes, and we watched the videos, they wanted to protest in a park close to Chicago in Skokie, Illinois, which was a predominantly Jewish neighborhood. So if there's one group that's really going to be offended by new Nazis above all after the Holocaust, it's going to be the Jewish people. So they really do not want these guys in their park preaching hatred. When is it not covered? What if they incite a riot? Is that peacefully? I think we would agree no. But what if they're telling to kill people in public? Is that covered? And I think the answer is no. But what if they're just preaching hatred and they're not saying kill or hurt this person? Is that covered? That's a big question. Okay, and if the peaceably assemble part of the First Amendment wasn't interpreted, if you won't protect those groups that have bad ideas, then maybe some groups with good ideas won't be protected. Would the March on Washington with Martin Luther King ever happened? I don't know. The President Johnson at the time asked him not to do it. He said, please don't have a March on Washington. It's not going to turn out good. Hundreds of thousands of people are going to show up. It's going to turn into a riot. It didn't happen that way at all. Martin Luther King gave his most famous speech, I Have a Dream. Over 300,000 people showed up. 1 out of 3 of them were white Americans and actually helped support the civil rights movement. And it was a very, very famous speech that you've probably seen or heard in your history classes, if not English. So I'm not sure it would have happened if the First Amendment did not say peaceably assemble and the president allowed it to happen under the First Amendment. Now, the final part of the First Amendment is we can write or email our politicians to what's called a petition. So we can write or email our politicians to either agree, disagree, or formally request a change in a law or the creation of a law through a petition. So petition is, you can see they're holding in their hands a paper petition. So you stand on the street, you've seen somebody at the corner, and they get signatures, and they get so many signatures. Sometimes you could change what are called state laws through an initiative. But we're not talking about state laws. In the federal government, you could petition all you want. Meaning I can get 100,000 signatures and send that to the senator of Missouri, Roy Blunt or Claire McCaskill. But do they have to change their point of view of the way they're going to vote on a bill? And the answer is no. Under the federal government system, we have what's called a republic. And under a republic, you get to vote for your representatives, but in America, we cannot vote on bills or laws to be. We can't vote on wars. We can't vote on any of that stuff. Under republic, we get one representative, and then we get 2 senators per state, and that's it. So if you want to make a difference, and which I have done on many occasions, I've petitioned my members of the government on a regular basis. So it's really easy electronically. I sign lots of petitions that I want them to do this or that. You don't have to do paper petitions anymore. But it says right here in the First Amendment that you could say, hey, I don't agree with you at all. Now, you can't threaten them, and that's a question on the First Amendment too. Can you threaten people? Is that covered? Or is that not covered under freedom of speech? So, but I could say, hey, I disagree with this, is a bad move. And you can also tell them, I'm not going to vote for you next time. Because under a republic, you do have the right to vote for or against that person. Again, you get to fire or hire them next time. So these are some things I want you to think about. Remember the 4 parts of the First Amendment. You got separation of church and state. Government and religion have to stay separate in America. The second one is freedom of speech and press. The media, the government can't sit there and tell them they can't publish this and that. But to what point? What if it jeopardizes the safety of soldiers in the military? Can they publish that? Or is that not covered? Peaceably Assemble means peacefully people can get together, regardless if they disagree with the government or most people in America. And then finally, we can send a petition. We can actually write our government we're not happy with them. So we'll move on to the Second Amendment in the next video. Thanks for checking in.